Phone booth fighting is back. Phone booth fighting morning edition. Frank, as we tape, this would be what it would be like if you and I had one of those network television morning shows like Kathy and Hoda.
Kathy and Hoda.
both of us just sitting there clutching our coffee mugs, talking about all the crazy things our kids have been doing. I'd be short on that. You'd have to carry the show at that point. It'd be nothing but your children's stories.
I said, or you could do the thing with the dogs or your kids.
Yeah, that's true. I could do that, and then all of our viewers would write in indignant that I compare my dogs to kids, and I don't know what it's like, and all that sort of thing.
We have a family member that does that. I won't say whose side of the family, so people can't narrow it down between my wife and I.
Yeah, that means it's hers. Go ahead.
They celebrate Mother's Day. They have no children, but they have.
We do that. We do Mother's Day and Father's Day cards and little presents. Yeah, we do that.
Yeah, but you guys, I think still, like even right now, I don't feel tension. Like obviously there's, there's cuteness and humor behind it without, that's my kid, man. You know what I mean? Like, no. Yeah. Don't you think that it's any less than you having a real human child?
Yeah. What I was telling somebody the other day, this lady I know has a 10-year-old, and it's her only child. She was just talking about they're starting to, notice girls or whatever. Anyway, we're just getting that conversation. And I said, what I think would be a great gag is so like she has a 10-year-old. If I go out and just adopt a 12-year-old and then become an immediate expert, like every time I see her, I'm like, oh, wait till you get to 12. Oh my gosh. You think you've got your hands full at 10. Wait until you see 12 and just drive people crazy.
What's funny? I'm about to tell you something that probably would make no sense to you, but I've seen it so many times, it drives me insane.
What's up?
Steve, the guy I conditioned with the Lifetime, he has a grandchild now. Mm-hmm. His daughter's in her 20s and stuff. And so we were making a joke about how the daughter, is kind of your typical 20-year-old with a kid. And I actually seen it happen with my mother-in-law and her youngest daughter. Now you got to keep in mind, my mother-in-law has raised 4 girls who are all pretty successful and, they're not living under a bridge anywhere, Mm-hmm. And my wife has 4 children. And then my other sister-in-law has a daughter. And then the youngest one has a daughter. And we were sitting there one time, and the youngest one was trying to correct her mother, my mother-in-law, on the proper way to change the diaper or something. I'm looking and I'm like, and I even had to finally mention something like, hey, that doesn't make you feel uncomfortable? Could you imagine going and she's in her 60s. She's changed more than you'll probably ever change. So she's had 4 daughters, 5 grandchildren. This is the 6th one.
Yeah.
You really think you know more? And you see that all the time where there's these new parents that don't take advice from people that have been there and done that. And they really feel like now that they have a kid, like they're this all-knowing expert. I'm like, well, that's the first step to know that you're full of shit, because you're probably wrong.
Where do you want to start today, Frank? We can shoot around. We got MMA, we got current events, we got scandals. Got a few scandals. We start with MMA. All right. Brock Lesnar, a guy that I think you're somewhat familiar with. He is a free agent. Apparently, he is no longer under contract to the WWE. I don't think for any particular reason. But that makes him a free agent. That means he could come back to MMA where, he's an older guy. He hasn't fought in a long time, but he's obviously still a bankable star. That means that he could take a UFC fight. Hell, he could sign with another organization if they can back up the bank truck like Bellator. I don't know if right now is the time to be hoping for record-breaking offers given the climate of everything. But nonetheless, he's a free agent. And of course, Jon Jones has vacated his light heavyweight title in the UFC and is talking about bulking up and moving up to heavyweight. These two things don't have to coincide with each other. They could just be exclusive and independent of each other. But I think that's the first thing that comes to a lot of people's mind, that you would have a bankable pay-per-view fight there. So thoughts?
I think that I don't know.
Hey, by the way, Frank, before you answer, give me a little more headroom.
Oh,
yeah, just a little.
how's that?
There we go. Yep. Gotta like to see the top of your head, because I like to see your brain when it's processing up there. Yeah, go ahead.
Brock, obviously, I mean, he can make money wherever he goes in either area. I wouldn't be surprised if he still just resigns with pro wrestling because of the ability to make money with a little bit less, getting kicked in the liver type of scenario. Could he go back to the MMA and fight? I think so. If he wanted to, it'd still be very successful. I mean, he's a phenomenal, strong wrestling background. And if he picked smart fights and took, a book out of, a page out of Connor's book when Connor has moved up in weight, and being selective about who he picks at welterweight. If Brock was selective about which heavyweights he fought, that match up well with his style, I think that would be, behoove him, but I think that if he makes a move in MMA, first, I think it'd be only UFC, because financially be able to take care of him. I don't see that Bellator has the financial, means to to compensate him. And then, when it first happened, the idea in my head started hitting that and I don't know how serious they are about having those fights on Tyson's farm. Something like that, where setting up, now that he's a free agent, availability to set up a fight like that would be interesting and be intriguing, and just depending on how much backing they have, to sway the pot in a direction that motivates him.
Tyson's farm? I haven't heard about this.
I saw it on social media where Tyson's farm, they were talking about putting on some MMA fights, and it was like, I think Rashad Evans versus Tito 3. Verdum versus Fedor, and honestly, I probably kind of waved it off like everybody else did. Like,
Tyson's farm sounds like a meat processing plant.
Yeah, well, you got Tyson's chicken, so I guess that's
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know why he would. You look at the pro wrestling equation for Brock Lesnar, and that's a different equation than it is for a lot of pro wrestlers. I mean, if you're talking about the rank and file pro wrestler, yeah, that's a hard row to hoe. Even at the top, like in WWE, massive travel. You just beating your body all to hell. But if you're Brock Lesnar, it's a different deal. He doesn't have to travel like that. He works a real limited schedule. He's booked what they call in the wrestling business like a monster, meaning he's not doing backflips off the top rope. He gets in there and, as long as he can suplex an opponent, he just does a bunch of monster moves like that. And that's all they're looking for out of him. I'm not saying it doesn't still take its toll on your body, but like you said, compared to getting kicked in the liver, it's a different deal. And it's a ton of money. That's the other thing too. I would understand if MMA was going to actually translate into many more real dollars than pro wrestling would. But everything about that, to me, would indicate that pro wrestling is the place for him to be, to make the money. And you bring up the point about Bellator. Yeah, I mean, if another organization besides the UFC were to sign him, I mean, not only would it cost millions of dollars, but you'd also need to have a ready-made apparatus in place to make that money back. UFC has pay-per-view. Not that Bellator can't do a pay-per-view. They have in the past. But it's not anything that they're doing with regularity. And so it's almost like you'd have to create if you were another organization, you'd have to create an apparatus just for the fact that you're getting Brock Lesnar to try to make that money back.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that honestly, I don't see why he wouldn't just re-sign with the pro wrestling. Even if he wanted to take a less of a stance or less, not even wanting to fill the monster role, if he's just making appearances and being an ambassador for their sport, he's still a huge draw for them, and would make a lot of money doing very little.
Before we move on with that, though, I'll ask this question because I got asked by a couple of people as soon as they saw that news. I assume that that is a fight you'd be interested in if they ever came calling and told you Brock Lesnar was interested in a rubber match.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. That's a match I think about all the time. As far as 1-on-1 against each other and coming out with a third fight to find out, who was really the better man.
How do you beat it?
I think Brock still, even in his last fight, when losses, we saw that Brock doesn't really like to get punched. And in his fight with Hunt, you're seeing that he just avoided, he embraced that instead of trying to fix it and just went for takedowns. So I think that if you fight Brock, it's just making sure you're constantly putting pressure with strikes on him. So even if he takes you down, make sure you just end up in guard so that you can still strike with elbows and still beat him up, because I don't think he's the kind of guy that likes that. If he's in your guard and you're smashing him down with elbows, I think that he would rather you try to pivot on an arm or go for an arm bar so he can enhance his position and make it a grappling match. I think Brock's way more comfortable wrestling, obviously, national champ. He's had some pretty adverse reactions to striking in the cage. We've seen him.
Ooh, we lost Frank for a second. Hold on. You're back, Frank. You dropped off with he's had some adverse reactions to getting hit in the cage.
Punch, so he really panics. So unless he has the world's greatest sports psychologist, he's not going to fix that in a fight or two. It's going to take some time. And not that it's not fixable, but it takes some repetitions of going out there and seeing what you're afraid of and then having success against it. Right now, his last couple fights, anytime he's been hit, it's gone bad for him. So that's in the back of his head, Probably a motivating factor to stick to pro wrestling, to be honest with you.
Do you think that ended up being the playbook on me? I came into my fights with, this monster reputation. And I think a lot of people were mesmerized by that. But then they saw that I didn't really do well with getting hit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that could be said, something to there. But the one thing is both you guys were so young that I think they're fighting and just hope for the best. And it worked out for them.
Were you, back to reality, were you thinking everything you just laid out, that concept of how Brock did with getting hit and all that, how did that differ from the way you were thinking about him going into the second fight? Or did it? Is that something you were already maybe starting to think about?
I wasn't aware that he was that bad at it, because at the time, he was doing a lot of training with like Tim Sylvia, and he was bringing guys in. And I hadn't heard until afterwards when we saw him react really bad against Cain Velasquez and, and panic a little bit against Carwin and in the striking area. You see, like, oh man. And then all of a sudden, people started becoming more vocal about, he doesn't like to get hit. All his sparring partners, people started admitting that. No, he doesn't want to be hit. He hates it. It makes him panic. He stresses him out. Like, not that anybody, like, I don't enjoy getting punched in the face, but obviously it's not a deterrent to my fighting style. Whereas with Lesnar, and then you've seen it in the last fight with Hunt, which I thought was smart of him. You know what I mean? Like, he knows that he doesn't like to get hit. He's kind of a coward when it comes to that. He realized that, and so he fought like that. He just basically ran around and took shots and held Hunt down. I don't think he threw 2 punches on his feet in 15 minutes because he knew that if he stood there, then punches could come back at him. So, hey, realize your shortcomings. He realizes his, and he, took advantage of it, and and fought to his strengths.
Do you think that? Do you think that's something you can just get used to? Because I was making a joke earlier, but in truth, I have had the thought that, man, maybe if I had started much earlier in life, even in a controlled situation, periodically getting hit really hard, I could get used to that. Because I think a big part of it was, as much as anything, just kind of the shock of it. It's not even so much the, you're incapacitated, you don't know where you, there's a little bit of that for sure, but it's just, I don't know how you get used to that unless it just has happened to you more than a couple of times. So in all seriousness, do you think that's the kind of thing that if we rewind the clock on Brock Lesnar, forget pro wrestling and all, we're just going to make him an MMA fighter, and we're going to start him at, 20 years old with that size and that power and all that kind of thing. If he had more fights and if he had gotten, hit harder more often earlier and had the usual path that a lot of MMA fighters have, do you think it turns out just the same, or some people just not cut out to be able to be hit, or can we build up a tolerance to that?
Well, there's always going to be a few of those people that no matter what can't adapt to a certain situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think more often than not, and that's what our military proves all the time, people adapt. You put a person in an adverse enough environment, and at first they're shell shocked and they don't like the situation, and then they become acclimated to it. And fighting's the same way, and in getting hit, it's just one of those things that you have to acclimate to. You have to start getting used to and realizing that, this is just, it is what it is. It's part of it. We try to avoid taking big shots, but, you can't sit there and be so apprehensive that it's going to happen that, that it affects how you fight. That'd be an equivalent if somebody walked out the door and every moment of every breath they take, they're worried they're going to die. We all know we're going to die. But if you let it consume you, what kind of life are you going to live? And that's how I think about fighting. When I'm inside the fighting, I know logically that, the situation could arise where I take a bad shot. It's not probably, when, or not if, but when, right? You got to just, okay, how can I try to statistically do the best I can to avoid that? And just then you let it go. You can't let it consume you. And again, a lot of that just comes with time under pressure. It's easier. That's why we do so many matches. And, you look at wrestling, they wrestle so many matches before you go to a higher level. We have amateur careers because we get guys used to what it's like to fight before they step up to the professional level. So more reps always ends up improving. Are there those few freaks out there that can't get it? Probably, but for the most part, anybody given enough time and training and enough real live goes. Because that's one thing that I tell people, like, you can train as much as you want in the gym and make improvements, but the biggest leaps you're going to make in confidence and knowledge are going to be when you go for real, because there's a difference. Succeeding in practice, like, yeah, that's cool. Succeeding in a real fight, yes, and just because you don't fail in practice doesn't guarantee you're not going to fail in the fight, So the fight is the ultimate testing ground, proving ground.
Yep, makes sense. What do you think about the idea of the Jon Jones matchup? If Brock were to take that fight with the UFC, if that could be made, as much I don't like it. Actually, I don't like Brock in MMA anymore. I think I've told you before, he reminds me of that absentee dad that's never really been in your life, but he just shows up at important occasions and makes it all about him, like high school graduations and weddings and stuff like that. And I think it also, I don't think we need any more fans in MMA. I think it brings the knucklehead factor, but I realize that's because I'm not a stockholder. So I see all the financial sense it makes. In terms of moving Jon Jones up to heavyweight, I think that's a win for Jon Jones. And he beats a monster. You know, there's plenty of heavyweights he could beat that would be more impressive wins at this point, but not necessarily from a PR perception. And the other thing it would do is it makes Jon Jones more of a bankable pay-per-view star. I mean, one of the things that's always been an issue with Jon on the highest level is that he's always been at least a half step below Conor and Ronda and a couple of those other people. Put him with Brock, bankable. It's I think a strong debut in the heavyweight division. It's nothing I want to see, but I could totally see the case to be made for doing it from a business standpoint. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Lesnar would have to be paid a lot of money to take that fight because I think that's an extremely bad fight for him.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen Lesnar on his back and he panics bad. I remember when he fought Velasquez and he hit his back and Velasquez was punching him. He actually was screaming out, "Stop, stop, stop." Because he couldn't, he didn't want to bring his hands down to tap or make that motion because he was trying to protect himself from the punches. And I think Jon puts him on his back. Jon takes him down, and Jon took down Cormier.
Mm-hmm.
I think Cormier takes down Brock. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that's a good fight for Brock. Phenomenal fight for Jon. If Jon, I didn't take that fight, that'd be the craziest move of his career. That's a fight he probably wins 10 out of 10 times.
Right.
If I was Brock, I would actually fight someone like Ngannou. I think Francis would be a much better fight for him because all he knows is he has to. Both guys are pretty one-dimensional. And, I think that being said, more often than not, Brock blasting Ngannou down with a double and beating him up is going to be more statistically common or practical than Ngannou landing the one big shot before he grabs him.
That's interesting. Yeah, he fights, let's say Ngannou beats him, then Ngannou, one, makes a lot of money in a strong pay-per-view. Also, even though he's not beating a contender, he beats a huge name, and that puts him on a broader radar that encompasses a lot of casual fans. I mean, that's a star-making fight for Ngannou. I mean, I should say a bigger star than, what he currently is in the MMA space. And then if by some chance Brock wins, you get another big fight out of him. He'll probably get exposed in the second one, but it definitely elevates him higher than probably any other single win could. That's an interesting one. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think that good fights are where the company benefits regardless of who wins. And I think that box off for all the factors you just stated. And then another element to matchmaking is you have to make it seem appealing to both guys. Mm-hmm. I would tell Brock, hey, here's a guy who his loss we've seen has always been to grappling. He fatigues in grappling. So even if you don't finish him in the first round, he'll gas out from all the wrestling. If you can put the wrestling on him, and he doesn't have any submission.
Frank dropped out. Just 1 second here.
I'm on the podcast, baby. Remember 10 to 11?
Oh, hang on. We got a black screen, but I hear him. Do you hear me, Frank?
Yeah, I can hear me. Can you see me?
I can't see you. I can hear you. Screen went black. Wait. See it trying to reconnect. See if he comes back here in a second. I hear you, Frank. Go ahead and keep talking there for a second. We'll see if you come back on screen.
All right. Anyways, so then I could go, I think I made my case for why Brock would want to take the fight going to his camp. And then Ngannou, I'd say the same thing. Like, hey, look, that he's just going to try to grab you and take you down. You land a shot on him. He's shown that he's been afraid of getting hit before. Let's just lower your stance, get ready to throw uppercuts, land one big one and this fight's over with, and now you've beaten probably, not probably, outside of Conor, the biggest pay-per-view seller that we have in MMA is Lesnar. And so now we have, you're going to absorb some of that popularity and fame, and you're one punch away from it.
Frank, you want to drop out and reconnect here? I'll do a couple of plugs while you're doing that. I want to try to get you back on camera here. All right. While we have a second, Frank's reconnecting. I'll direct everybody's attention over to phoneboothfighting.com. You're going to see a couple of banners up there for American Shaman CBD. That is one of Frank's sponsors. You click on that. There's a promo code there for you. If you want some very high quality CBD, Frank's wearing the American Shaman t-shirt there. I went ahead and did your American Shaman plug while you were reconnecting there, Frank.
Cool. Hopefully the wife won't keep trying to call me.
Oh, so that's what she was doing. You know what? That's probably what happened. If you answer the call, it probably turns camera off first.
Well, I told her before she went to the gym what I'd be doing today at this time. She called the first time. I sent her right through. Hopefully she understood that I never send her through unless I'm doing this.
Gotcha.
Then she called the second time, so I assumed it might have been important, but it was just that she wanted to talk to me.
That should make our listeners feel special. The only time Frank Mir ignores his wife is when he's talking to phone booth fighting listeners.
That's the only logical explanation I can come up without getting skinned alive. So.
All right. Hey, Alistair Overeem is in action this weekend. He is fighting Augusto Sakai, an undefeated UFC fighter, 4-0 in the UFC, 15-1-1 overall. I think kind of what's interesting about this, Frank, and I was going to see if maybe you had a relatable perspective on this, is, Alistair Overeem's 40 years old, one of the most well-traveled fighters, to put it kindly, in the UFC, certainly the heavyweight division. But he's coming off a win over Walt Harris. Of course, Walt had a horrible family tragedy he was dealing with coming into that fight, but still a TKO win over Walt Harris. He had that knockout loss to Jardinho Rosenstruck, where Rosenstruck basically tore Alistair Overeem's upper lip off. But up until that happened, Overeem was winning that fight. And then before that, wins over Alexei Olenek and Sergey Pavlovich. So you take away that, that punch that finished him with Rosenstruck, and you're probably looking at a 40-year-old fighter in Overeem, who is on a 4-fight winning streak himself. My question to you is this. This, to me, for Overeem, looks like one of those fights where you're essentially being, the message is this: you're 40 years old, you're one of the best to ever do it, you've had an incredible career, you still appear to have some gas in your tank at 40 years old. We're going to put you against this this guy with an undefeated UFC streak, and it's kind of a tester to see, okay, is this 40-plus-year-old surge legitimate, or is everything going to kind of level out? We're going to realize, hey, you can still fight, you can still win some fights and all that, but probably not be in the conversation for the heavyweight title. I'll tell you what it reminded me of when I started looking at these records, Frank. It reminded me a little bit of that place that you and Alistair Overeem were, you and Andrei Arlovsky were in a few years ago. I saw both you guys kind of course, you ended up fighting, but it was like in the fights leading up to that, you're beating Bigfoot, you're beating Todd Duffy, you're on this trajectory. Andrei Arlovsky re-signed by the UFC late in his career, but I don't think when they re-signed him, anybody thought they'd be talking about, this guy get a heavyweight title shot. And then, a few wins later, all of a sudden, that is kind of a conversation that's starting to be had. Hey, could this, where are we at here? It just kind of reminded me at that point. I mean, I know you weren't quite 40 yet, but, couple of older fighters, legendary heavyweight names, but really kind of a check to see where we're really at with this whole thing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. I think that if it looks good on paper for for Alistair to pull out a win over Sakai, just because of Sakai being a young guy who's, I think he's 15-1, with his only loss being Czech Congo and Bellator. You know, big guy, legitimate, heavyweight, obviously threat with an undefeated, with a streak of 4-0 now in the UFC. I think this is a turning point for both of them. If Sakai gets the winner of Overeem, I think he's fighting a top 5 heavyweight now, potentially moving up into that conversation. And same with Overeem. I think that a victory here really solidifies maybe really another talk about what next fight puts him in position for a title fight.
Agreed. I think that always makes for a compelling narrative if you're an MMA fan, and gives you good reason to tune in. That'll be this weekend. All right, Frank, let's do this. Let us hop over to our Patreon page. If you don't know, Frank and I have a Patreon page, patreon.com/phone booth fighting, where we do some premium content for you guys. Go over there, check it out. We got some merchandise incentives to join up with us, stuff we'd love to send you. But we're going to do some Patreon premium content over there. And I'll just tell you this. This week's topic is going to be a little too hot for podcasting. Too hot for podcasting. It had to be put behind the pledge wall over there. So let's do that. Let's wrap this one up, and we'll see you over there at patreon.com/phone booth fighting. For Frank Mir, I'm Richard Hunter. We'll see you next time.